those of you who are new to us, Engineerica specializes in academic center management systems for higher education. You might be familiar with some of our software applications such as AccuTrack, Academia, and AccuCampus. I do want to give, of course, a special welcome to any current Engineerica clients joining us today. And for those of you who are not yet clients, I do want to let you know that we are offering a complimentary fall trial of our most popular center management system, Academia. This gives you the opportunity to use Academia for an entire semester risk-free to see if it helps make management of your center and your data collection easier. So if you're interested in that, you can send me an email, rachelc@engineerica.com. That's RACHELC@ENGINEERICA.com. So we started this keynote series for our clients and contacts who wanted to learn more about best practices and trends in higher education. Each month we do feature a distinguished speaker to talk about hot topics in the academic and higher education support fields. So next month our speaker is going to be Rick Breich, who will be presenting on executive function. So we'll be making an announcement through email and social media when registration opens, so be on the lookout for that. So a quick introduction to myself. I'm Rachel Cook. I am a client success manager with Engineerica. I was previously a learning center manager in different community colleges down here in Florida for 6 years. So like you, I'm very passionate about higher education and student success. I also have with me Jorge Rodriguez, who is one of our technical support specialists. He's here as my backup and also to help with any technical issues that come up on our end, our speakers end, or yours. So say hi, Jorge.
Hello.
Hi. So with that said, I am pleased to introduce you to this month's speaker. Wendy Simmerman has over 20 years of experience in progressive leadership progressive leadership positions within higher education. Wendy has worked in academic support, online and continuing education, assessment and curriculum development, workforce development, and extended education. And she also spent 10 years in the classroom as an adjunct writing instructor. So she's very passionate about expanding access to education and helping people find success in the workforce. Without further ado, Wendy, I am going to go ahead and make you the presenter, and then you can take it away. And there we go.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much. I think it just showed my entire screen, right?
Yes.
And I move into, okay, are you just seeing slides now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So when I have that open, I won't be able to see questions coming through and what else
I'll
is
keep
happening.
an eye on them for you. Yep.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachel. But welcome, everyone. I'm so delighted to do this presentation today. In fact, I honestly woke up at 5:30 this morning and remembered that today was the day, and I was like, oh, yeah, I get to go talk to people about this. So planning your career in higher education is just one of my favorite topics because I love education and I love career building. So my most recent career pathways into workforce development have been a great fit, right? Because I love helping people line up with the right opportunities. And so I'm approaching this today as a kind of a big picture, like your career is this big span of time, right? Like for most of us, it's, you know, good 30+ years that we'll spend in the workforce. And so this isn't necessarily how to find your next job, although I hope that you will get a lot of practical strategies that you could use in finding the next role. But it really is also about thinking long-term and deciding what it is that you want and how to achieve it. And allowing for those moments of serendipity that will happen in your career. At least they've happened for me, where it's something totally unexpected that you weren't even thinking about, just kind of dropped into your lap and ends up being the perfect thing for that season of your life. So I would suggest that you keep a pen and paper nearby, or a laptop, a phone that you could take notes on, because I love questions, and so I'll ask questions that you may want to jot down some thoughts about that would be relevant to your situation, if that makes sense. And I apologize for the poor lighting. I'm still adjusting to a new home office situation and haven't quite figured out the lighting. Okay, So the first step in being strategic and intentional about building a career is to really know who you are. So the first question that I have, and if you want to put the answers into the chat box, that would be fantastic, is what is your current role? So what is your current role professionally? And you can answer that as broadly or specifically as you'd like. You could say, I'm in academic affairs, or I'm in student affairs. I work at a community college, or you can give us your job title. But I'm very curious what your current role is in terms of who you are. Now, that doesn't define who you are, right? And that's not really the heart of what I'm asking. But I'm saying that for me, part of my strategy in building a rewarding and successful career has been to really tune in to who I am. And here's a few tips on how to achieve that. First of all, think about what gets you excited. What gets you up in the morning? I was excited to get up this morning because I knew I got to come talk with you about building a career. So obviously, talking with people in this forum or in other things is exciting to me. Talking about this particular topic is exciting to me. And so those are things that can help as you think about the different facets of your current role. As you think about past roles that you've had, what are some of the things that you enjoyed the most? And these don't have to be anything grandiose. If one of the things that you really enjoyed, excuse me, if one of the things you really enjoyed in a prior role was having a weekly informal staff meeting in the break room, and you just liked how everybody got together and it was really chill, and you felt bonded to people, and you guys could talk about work things and personal things, and there was just a great vibe there. If that's one of the things that got you excited and made you look forward to going to work each day, write that down, make a note of that. Because what we're doing right here is we're kind of creating a data set. We're going to make a list of all those things that you loved about past roles, that you love about your current role, and then see where the patterns are and see how that might carry over to helping you determine what types of roles you want to explore in the future. The second thing that I think that many people don't think about too much, and the pandemic with the whole shift to remote and then back has kind of pushed us to thinking about it a little bit more, but that is, what is the ideal work situation for you? I think that a lot of times when we think about changing jobs, we think in terms of, what are my salary requirements? Most of us don't change jobs unless there's an upward movement in salary. Although, sometimes under certain circumstances, salary is not a consideration, but many times it is. So we think in terms of, how much money do I want to make? Or we think, well, what's the job title? Is it a step up? What's the scope of responsibility? Will I be supervising more people? Will I have a more high profile role? But we don't think very much about, what is the ideal situation and environment that I do my best work in? What meshes well with my personality and who I am? And I would suggest that that might be one of the more important questions that you should be asking, because in the HR field, and as many of you, if you're administration in learning centers and learning assistants, you've done your fair share of hiring, right? And the thing that we always talk about is the right fit. Part of that fit is this ideal work situation, ideal environment. If you get somebody who has a strong need to be very independent and autonomous in their work environment, and the job requires a high degree of oversight and checking in with other people, it doesn't really allow independence and autonomy, that is not a good fit. So it's really important to think about the physical environment. How do you like to work in a physical environment? I think one thing that some of us have taken away from the pandemic and the shift to remote work is that there were some advantages to being in person, where you could walk from meeting to meeting, and it's not quite as active to walk from my office to the kitchen. And so that's something I've personally learned that I missed, is being able to have more physical movement, and I can still have it in a remote or a hybrid environment. I just have to be more intentional and thoughtful in planning it into my workday. What type of supervision do you like? Again, some people have a greater need for autonomy, and some people want to have a closer relationship and a closer connection with their supervisors. And then what type of role? Do you enjoy a role that has a lot of interfacing with other people? Do you enjoy a role that has a good amount of solitary time? These are all really important things to know, because it also can inform the questions that you ask when you go into an interview. And an interview should be a two-way street, right? Like, you should be finding out about the organization to make sure that it's a good fit for you, not just them finding out whether you're a good fit for them. And if you know what your ideal requirements in a job are, what type of environment allows you to do your best, then you'll be prepared to speak to that in an interview. And then the third thing in terms of identifying who you are is start thinking about what areas within higher ed are interesting to you, and how can you identify opportunities that you don't currently know about. And along with what type of higher education. Having worked in some different institutions, I can tell you there are some very real and significant cultural differences between a more elite private education institution and an open enrollment public institution. There are differences between community college culture and a university culture. And for many people, the differences may not matter. Like, those, you might be able to just seamlessly navigate between those different environments, but for other people, it would be a deal breaker. And so really doing, taking the time to maybe learn about those, talk to people who work in different settings within higher education, and figure out what works for you, what appeals to you. And it's okay if you don't know. Sometimes we don't know till we try, and then we get into a situation, we go, oh, this doesn't really work, or I love this, this is the perfect fit for me. All right, so identifying opportunities. I'm going to start by talking about how we identify opportunities in your current employment situation. Because I realized that, actually, sorry, I'm going to go back to the last slide, because I just looked at my notes and I saw one thing that I didn't address, and I feel like it's kind of important. And that is part of this self-knowledge I'm talking about, is also know why you want to make a change. And you've got to be really honest with yourself, like, what's driving, what's motivating that change. And you may ask this question multiple times over a career, right? Because for most Americans, you're going to change positions and careers, and even careers, into different fields or related fields between 7 and 11 times over the course of your career. So it's not just a one and done question. So what is driving this change? And in order to really answer that question, you've got to separate out the job from all the other factors. So if money is your primary motivator, if you're like, I love everything about my job, I need more money, this is not paying me well enough. If that's the primary motivation, then write that down as a separate thing, because money can come in a number of ways, right? And if you identify that as the core issue, then it opens your mind to start to say, are there other things that would solve that problem besides changing jobs? But maybe that's part of it. And maybe once you dig in, you'll be like, well, I'm also feeling bored in my current role. I do want to make more money, but I also just feel like it's time for a change. And so you can see how starting to ask those questions is helping you start to understand what it is that you need and want out of a new opportunity. And it also, as you ask yourself those questions, you may see possibilities to modify your current role to address some of those needs. So, because maybe you really do like everything about your role, but you're coasting and you're bored, and you've been doing this for a while, and you just need new challenges, and you've tried, several different ways to kind of keep the fire going. You've taken a couple classes, you've done some professional development, but at the end of the day, you're bored. If you're being honest with yourself, you're bored. And if you're satisfied with every other aspect of the job, then maybe before you start looking for something else, maybe you sit down and make a list of what you could do to change that within your current realm. Does that mean a candid conversation with your supervisor to say, how can I, take on more challenges, or how can you, how could I have the chance to job shadow within the institution to try. Now I'm jumping ahead to the next slide, but the important thing is knowing what motivates and drives you as you're building your career. And in order to do that too, you do need to think about what role work plays in your life, what role your career plays in your life. Because especially if you would like your career to be one of an upward trajectory, which I think many of you attending, that's probably the case. Your interest in this webinar came because you are thinking, how can I, scale up? How can I take my career to the next level? And that's awesome. There's nothing to be ashamed. I mean, every now and again, I'll get somebody who's like, that's ambition, that's a bad thing. No, and the reason I think it's not a bad thing is because we need you. We need like good, talented leaders in every level, every scope of higher education. So good on you for wanting to, take that next step and take on that responsibility and bring your skills to the table. We need you. But sometimes with higher levels of responsibility, there's expectations that you might not actually want to carry out. And I had a really like cold water in the face moment, gosh, probably like 10, 15 years ago, probably closer to 15 years ago. I was attending a women in leadership event, and for whatever reason, I happened to be seated during lunch. I happened to be seated at a table with, I think there were 2 university presidents and a couple of vice presidents and a state chancellor or commissioner. It was a high-powered table. And then there was me. And this was much earlier in my career. And so I felt, pretty junior compared to these other women. And as they started to share their stresses and, just their day-to-day life, because for them, this was a group of peers, right? This was other women in high levels of academia. And as they started to talk about, for example, their schedules, one of them said, I am just exhausted traveling every weekend. Like, I have speaking engagements booked out the next Saturdays for 6 months. And then on Sunday, I'm catching up on all the work that I didn't get done earlier in the week. And, someone else was like, I begin my day at 5 a.m. and I'm answering emails by 6 a.m. And as they talked about the challenges of the roles, I remember sitting there and thinking, I choose not that. Apparently there are limits to my ambition because that doesn't sound appealing to me at all. I'm okay, occasionally working late. I'm okay coming in on a Saturday every once in a while, and I'm fine to, shoot off some quick emails before I go to bed. I am not okay with giving up, every facet of my personal life for this. So, and I'm not saying that every higher level position is like that either, because as I've matured in my career, I've realized that wise leaders set boundaries around their careers and their personal time, and even no matter how intensive their roles are, they're still very deliberate and intentional at carving out time for all the things that are important to them. But I do think that it's important to be honest with yourself. If you really want to, come to work, put your time in, and then be done for the day and not ever be expected to deal with after hours emergencies, then you need to be clear about what kind of roles you are looking for and what would be satisfactory for you. So moving on, how do we identify opportunities at your current institution? And I have a few ideas that I wanted to share with you. First of all, thinking about networking outside of the box. I usually cringe when people talk about networking in a conventional, traditional way, because I'm not a very good schmoozer. I'm actually a horrible one. One of my key personal values is authenticity. And so I hate anything that feels artificial, that feels like I'm just trying to connect with you because you might be able to do something for me. But I love authentic relationships, and I love creating and cultivating those. And so I kind of accidentally realized early on in my career that while schmoozy kind of networking didn't work for me at all, authentic networking worked really, really well for me. And part of what has made that successful is building in daily and consistent habits of connecting with people that have allowed me to develop those authentic kind of relationships. So some of those that have helped me over time is having a daily practice of starting my day with thank yous. So I keep stacks of thank you cards in my physical office, and this can also be done via email or social media or text message. But it means that every morning I stop and think, who has done something that I should thank them for lately in my professional realm? And this could be anybody. And it could be just a very quick message, you know, in Teams or on Slack to say, hey, thanks for speaking up in that meeting yesterday. You had a great perspective and I'm really glad you shared it. That's it. I mean, it can be that simple, but just making this daily practice of acknowledging all the good things that people around you do does wonders to build strong relationships with your colleagues, with your supervisors. I'll tell you, and I'm sure those of you who are supervisors can attest to this, it can be lonely and you don't get a lot of appreciation. You're the ones expected to appreciate everybody else. But, you know, sometimes having one of your employees say, hey, I really appreciate you writing that letter of recommendation. That means a lot, is huge. So be so generous with your gratitude. Share that. Another regular practice that I've tried to keep for many years is, again, to make an intentional goal of going out to lunch once a week with a colleague or a group of colleagues. And it can be from my institution, it can be from a different institution, it can be in my professional field, it could be outside of my professional field. Sometimes it's even just a personal friend. And we'll talk in a minute about how personal friends can play a part, and family members can play a part in your career planning. But the idea is just to come up with something that feels right for you. Those things work with my personality. I don't like large events and big crowds of people and shaking hands and, you know, blurs of names and faces, which I'm really bad at remembering, but I'm very good in one-on-one. And so coming up with practices that allow me to connect with people in that space works really well for me. I also want to mention that in terms of the gratitude and the making friends with people, cast a wide net. Be deliberate in making friends with, being willing to make friends with anybody, because you never know what surprising opportunities will come because you got to know the person that empties your garbage in your office every day. Or let me tell you, administrative assistants and department secretaries, those are the best friends to have. They know everything. And they have helped me navigate, my friends who are in those roles have helped me navigate so many interesting situations over the years. And even just, you know, unexpected rewards that have nothing to do with necessarily your career. I found that by having a wide network of friends across the institution, I find out about, say, impact, ways that my program is having an impact on students or people that I never would have heard if I wasn't talking with the person that, you know, has an office down the hall. And then I'm a really big advocate for taking your career into your own hands, and don't wait for formal mentor or job shadow opportunities. If you have them, great. If your institution has protocols in place where you can do a leadership academy or you can sign up for an official job shadow, job trade kind of experience, take advantage of it. But don't sit around and wait for it. Look for mentors, look for opportunities to learn more about people's jobs. And the best way that I've found to do this is to just ask questions. Just be curious. Just ask people questions about what they do. And if there's someone that, you know, has a role that you think, that actually sounds kind of interesting, then make it more formal. Send them an email and say, I'm really intrigued by these specific aspects of your job, and I'm wondering if it would be a good fit for me as I think about my career long term. Could I take 30 minutes of your time at your convenience and come ask you questions about your job? And then when you show up, have your list of questions ready. Don't waste their time. You know, don't expect them to carry the load of educating you about the job, but have some good questions ready, and be open to the kinds of answers that you'll receive, because they may say, like, here's all of the down and dirty stuff. If I had it to do over again, I wouldn't get into this line of work. Take it all in, and if it doesn't feel right to you, if you're like, wow, you were really negative, I don't know if this is reflective of the field at large, then find somebody else you can ask as well. But the point is, don't be afraid to ask for those opportunities. You can even say, I'm looking for a mentor. It's okay to be that direct and that vulnerable, because when people understand what it is that you're asking, and be specific. I struggle when, like, there was one time a while ago when I had a student employee come to me and say, I want you to be my professional mentor. And I said, great, what does that mean? Well, you mentor me. Okay, so what exactly do you want me to do? I don't know, you mentor me. And I wasn't sure what to do with that. So be specific, you know, say these are the things that I would like your help with. And we'll talk about some specifics in a minute. And then I think this is a really important one. Identify in-demand skills, because those are always shifting and changing, partly because technology shifts and changes, partly because, for example, if you're in public education, legislation changes the imperatives of what we are supposed to do, what the priorities are. If you've been around for a while, you might remember the pre-STEM era, when STEM wasn't the big thing, and you know, didn't have millions and millions of dollars being directed to it. And so having a kind of an ear to the ground of what's happening will allow you to pivot. And STEM is actually one example of that. When I was working for public universities, I paid close attention to the legislative season, and I knew what education bills were coming up. And so when the legislature appropriated a rather large amount of money for STEM support at public K-12 and universities, I was ready. I had my proposal ready to go, you know, up to our vice president and say, I want some of this money for the learning assistance program, and here's why I think we should get it, and here's how much money they're handing out at the state level, here's how much I think we can get at our institution. And I knew all of that before he did. So be prepared to identify those in-demand skills. Now that's kind of a big picture version, but what you could do, and this is something I suggest that you do anyway, is set aside a time each week, even if it's just 10 minutes, to go through job postings at your institution and possibly outside if you're expanding your search, but we'll start with just yours, and look at the skills, the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they require. And you may start to see trends over time. Like I have noticed that in the last couple of years, more and more job postings want people with project management experience. That wasn't a thing a few years ago, but it is now. Probably 10 years ago, one of the big things that you frequently saw in higher education job postings was assessment and evaluation, because that was the big thing then. Well, and you know, we still do assessment. I'm not saying we don't. I'm just saying there was some national trends of legislatures and other governing bodies demanding more accountability, more assessment. And so that was people who had skill in that area were a kind of a hot commodity. So pay attention, look for those things. And that will tell you not only areas where you could upskill, but also how you can take your skill set, your current existing skill set, and apply it to those trending areas, these new in-demand skills. So besides looking at job postings, what you can also do is pay attention to what you hear supervisors and campus leaders talking about in terms of what they need. What are some of the needs facing your institution? And then think, well, what kind of skills would allow me to, move into that space? And then the other thing in terms of in-demand skills, what skills do you need to be better at your current job? When I was managing Learning Center, my first Learning Center management role, I started to feel a little bit lost on the budgetary side and on the marketing side, because at that time we didn't have a central marketing support. So our marketing was completely on us. We had to, even down to like graphic design. So if I was lucky, I'd have a student employee who was somewhat talented, in the graphic design field, but it was very much a DIY thing. And I felt like I didn't know a whole lot about that. So I took advantage of my tuition benefit that I had working for a university, and I took an intro to accounting and an intro to marketing class so that I could just understand a little better, and it did help me in my role. But what I didn't anticipate was how much it has helped me down the road, because I know how to, and keep in mind, I know like this much about accounting and about marketing. It was, one semester of a beginner level class, but that was enough to give me vocabulary. That was enough to allow me to supervise people who were doing accounting functions, who were doing marketing functions, and be able to understand the scope of their work. And actually right now in my current position, I'm now responsible for millions of dollars in marketing budgets that'll go out to in multiple contracts over the next couple of years. And that's fine. I don't have any worries about that because of that core competency that I picked up in just that one intro to marketing class. So what are the skills that help you in your current role? And I would bet you anything that you can build on those as you move on to other roles as well. Okay, so looking outside your institution, because that's the next step, right? And maybe for some of you, it isn't. Maybe you love the institution you're at, you want to retire from there, and that's okay. Again, we come back to know yourself, know what is right for you, what works for you. But for those of you who are wanting to cast a wider net and who have the opportunity to do that, either through being in a geographic area where you have other options, or having the flexibility to move if you find an opportunity somewhere else. And as we're seeing today, having opportunities for remote work that make location not an issue. If that is your situation, then you can cast this wider net and look outside the institution. So here's a few ideas. And the first one I think is a super important one, because when people come to me for advice about job hunting within the space of higher ed, one of the most limiting things that I find is that they think I can only look for jobs like this. I'm an academic advisor, so I have to find an academic advising job. And if I want to move up, then I guess I look for an assistant director of academic advising. And that's narrow, right? That's going to keep them in a pretty narrow pool of potential jobs. I've joked for many years when people ask me what I do, especially because you rattle off a title and they're like, what exactly does that mean? My standard response is, I don't know. I go to work every day and I try to figure out what it means or learn what I do. But part of the reason for that is because I select the jobs that I will apply for based on the skills that I'm bringing, not the titles, not where the job is housed. I don't say, gosh, my whole career's been in academic affairs. I don't qualify for student affairs. Maybe I do if it's based on skill set. So if you're engaging in this regular practice of going through postings just to be familiar with what's happening in the landscape of higher ed, how are salaries looking, which by the way can be leverage in your current position, because if you notice that the same types of jobs you're doing are starting to scale up and people are paying more, go to your supervisor and say, I think we have a little problem. I think I should be making more money. So what I do when I'm looking at job families and skills, when I say job families, I mean jobs that are somewhat in the same realm. So jobs that all require some skill in data management, jobs that all require some type of leadership and supervision. That's a pretty broad family, right? But if I've identified that those are the types of things I'm looking at, then I go through those, and I like to use a percentage match. So I look at a job and I say, based on my skills and qualifications, how much of a percentage match am I to this job? And the reason I started using a percentage is because there's some compelling research that way too many people won't apply for a job unless they meet 80% or more of the criteria for the job. And when I say match, I mean like identical, check all the boxes, not like, oh, well, maybe I'm sort of okay with that. And what they found is that successful job applicants, especially those who tend to progress, will apply for jobs if they are a 50% or more match. And so as I started to come across that research and that data over and over again, I realized I needed to shift the way that I approached looking at new positions. And I needed to say, if I'm a 60% or more match, maybe I should give it a shot. So when I'm looking at postings, I'm asking myself, how do I, fit? Am I a 50%? Am I a 30% match? And sometimes there's an absolute deal breaker in there, that they'll say you must have this specific industry certification. And I go, well, I don't have that. So if I'm really, really, really interested in it, I may do some more research. I may call the HR office. I may ask a colleague who, is in that department if there's any leeway, if I have other experience to offset, would they consider? But the reason that I usually won't pursue it much further is because when they put required things, not just we'd like it, not preferred, but this is a must-have, it often means HR is going to screen you out before you'd even get to be seen by anybody else. So I choose not to put my time there unless I can talk with someone else. And then I ask myself, so let's say that it's a 70% match, and so I'm like, that's enough to get my interest, to think about whether this is an actual possibility. Then I look at the requirements of the job and I say, how would I align my experience and qualifications if I were writing a cover letter? And sometimes I'll even just, start writing it right then. I'll just make a bulleted list. Here's how my experience matches up with what they're looking for. And in the process of doing that, sometimes I'll realize I'm really not that interested. And sometimes I'll think, wow, I think I could make a really good case for this. I'm going to think, maybe I'll apply. Maybe this is a keeper. And then let's see. Oh, one more thing. If you don't already do it, an easy way to keep track, to do that like 10 minutes a week of reviewing postings is to subscribe to a job search engine like Higher Ed, where they'll send you a daily digest. You can set the parameters for geographic location, for type of role, whatever it is that the parameters that you want to put on it. And then each day they'll send, these are the jobs that pop up, new jobs that have been posted. And you can also do the same thing with LinkedIn, all of the key, the big job sites like Indeed and Monster. However, if you are interested in higher education specifically, I would recommend that you focus on search engines and sites that are unique to that. If your scope is narrow because let's say you have to stay within a certain geographic area for family obligations, other considerations, then it might be worth just using those particular institutions that are in that area and just checking them like once a week to see. And then judiciously, wisely, as you all know, let people know what you'd like to do. And the reason, of course, to be careful with that is that sometimes it's not a good idea to let word get out that you are actively looking. But there are ways that you can, again, judiciously share with, with people that you trust or within certain settings because you never know who's going to know of the perfect opportunity. So again, going back to this, like, don't get stuck in this one path where you think my only way forward is, you know, to stay in student affairs, or to, you know, I can only ever do advising because that's all I've ever done. Really, and especially in today's economy, the ability to pivot and transfer your skills is the most important thing that you can bring to the table if you want to build an upward career trajectory. And I say that as someone who has made significant lane changes a few times over the course of my career, where even I sometimes said, I don't know how this really is the next step. Like, it doesn't fit with what I've done in the past. And if you looked at just the generic scope of work or the job title, you might agree and say, yeah, I don't see how that fits either. But if you looked at the actual skill set, you would see greater alignment, and you would say, yeah, I see how that led you from that point to the next step in your career. So it really, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to understand what you're bringing to the table in terms of raw skills, and then be confident in your own ability to transfer that into a new environment. If you know that you're a good leader in the learning assistance field, you can probably be a good leader in another field. You just have to pivot. You just have to figure out, what do I need to do, you know, to make the shift from learning assistance into something else. I think one of the best ways to do this, and this is one of my most favorite things that I've done since I was like 14 years old, and that's to maintain a master document that tracks everything that you do professionally. Mine is so many pages long now. I you know, years ago I switched it to digital, and I keep it in the cloud. And about every 2 to 3 months, I set aside 30 minutes to update it. And I go in and I make sure that I have current information about the projects I've completed, any new skills that I've developed, achievements, professional achievements that I can put on there. And I intentionally don't really censor myself in terms of what types of projects. Earlier on in my career, I would sometimes think, well, this isn't relevant. Like, the fact that I had a chapter published in this, you know, pop culture book has no relevance to my professional life. And then I realized I never know what's going to be relevant. So it's smart to just dump it all in there. This is your master document. Nobody ever sees this. I've never shared mine. I mean, other than like just sharing it informally, I've never submitted it for a job application. It would be a mess. You know, it would be all over the place, and people would be going, so what exactly is your focus, you know, of your career? But what I do with my master's CV is I use it each time that I have to submit a resume or write a cover letter. I go back to this master's CV and I say, what experience do I have that is relevant to this position? So Rachel noted that I taught writing for 10 years as an adjunct. Many years ago, I was a finalist for a full-time tenured faculty position as a writing teacher. And when I applied for that job, you bet your sweet booty, I pulled out all my writing experience. I put everything, pop culture, professional, academic writing, into that CV because I wanted to show that I had depth and breadth of writing expertise as a writer myself, in addition to my ability to teach writing. That's probably the one and only time that I've ever put, you know, all of the writing into a resume, because most of the time it's not relevant to the types of jobs that I'm applying for. But I wouldn't even be able to speak to it at all if I hadn't kept track of it in this master document. So if you take nothing else from this webinar today, do that master CV, you know, dump everything in it, make sure you're updating it. Another reason to keep it updated is to track contact information for people who may be references for you, because that changes and shifts, and if you're not staying on top of it, you may find yourself, in fact, there was one time that someone wanted to hire me for a job, and it was the beginning of August, and my professional references were all faculty who were all out of the country. Just, happened that they were all out of the country right then. And the person hiring me ended up coming back and saying, I've never had to do this before, but I can't get a hold of any of your references. Can you give me some more names? So, so now on my master CV, I keep like 10 names on there just to be safe with contact information. Okay, so let's talk for a minute about your brand and developing a brand. We've already focused on know who you are. So that's the starting point. If you know who you are, that can help identify your brand. That might seem intimidating, especially when we start talking about social media accounts and things like that. So I would take a step back and say, what is your mission? Start with your mission and your value. What is it, like big picture, one sentence? What is it that fires you up about your job? When Rachel introduced me, she talked about that I'm passionate about student success and connecting people to job opportunities. And if we were going to simplify that, even further, and again, this is rooted in self-knowledge, right? I'm a first-generation college student. I know what a difference education and opportunity has made in my life. And so my personal mission is increasing opportunities for others, whether that's through education, whether it's through workforce. I love helping people open doors and be able to elevate their lives. That is what gets me out of bed in the morning. And that's very simple, right? Like, that's not a complicated mission statement, but it still took me a few years to figure it out, to be able to say, I mean, my first mission statement, I'm kind of embarrassed, but it was like, 6 bullet points. Like, I do this and I do this and I do this. And a really good mission, a really good brand for you is not I do XYZ, it's I am this. I am passionate about creating opportunity for people. I am a leader in innovative higher education practices. So developing your brand, starting with a mission statement, and you could go back to this, what are some of the previous roles I've had? What got me excited? What was meaningful to me? What are some of the patterns that you see across all of those roles? So it's very easy for me, even though I've had diverse roles over the course of my career, one thing that they all have in common is about increasing access and opportunity, especially for marginalized groups. And I didn't realize that until I looked at my resume and I was looking for what are the through lines, what did I do in each of these roles? And that's when I realized there's a common theme here. It also helps to say, what do you want to be recognized for? When someone's writing your obituary, giving your eulogy, what do you want them to say about you? What would be really meaningful to you if they said, Wendy was this kind of a person? That's helpful in creating a brand. Once you've kind of identified this core of who you are, then you can look for opportunities to promote your brand in ways that align with who you are. And I think one reason that we're sometimes uncomfortable with this idea of self-branding is because some forms of self-promotion won't feel authentic to you, and that's okay. I was talking with a former staff member a few years ago about this, and she said, I'm not on any social media and I don't want to be. Are you telling me that I have to join social media if I want to have a brand? And I said, nope, not even a bit. There's a really noted thought scholar and writer, Cal Newport. On the last slide, you'll see a list of recommended reading. He's got several that I love, and he doesn't have any social media. And he said his publicist hates it, and his marketing people hate it, but he doesn't engage in any form of social media. It's part of, one of his books is called Digital Minimalism, so go figure, right? But you don't have to do anything that's not true to who you are. What it does mean is that once you know what your brand is, you'll naturally find opportunities to promote that. And one of the best ways to, let me go to the next slide so we can talk about the next way. I do want to just point out one thing though here too. Your brand is not just who you are, but it can also be what you want to achieve. So especially maybe if you're in earlier stages of your career, you can say, you know, I'm passionate about student success and changing the way that we view marginalized populations. It can be aspirational in nature too. And one thing that's positive about that is that it suggests forward momentum. So you're gonna find other like-minded people that also want to do the same things. Okay, so one of my best strategies for using your brand is to come up with an elevator speech. And that's your 30-second pitch for what it is that you do. If you're not familiar with the term, just look it up. You'll find many, many examples. But this is where, you know, when I say I'm passionate about increasing opportunity and opening doors to people through education and through workforce development, that's my elevator speech right there. That tells people what I do, who I am. And if I was really going a full 30 seconds, you know, there's a little more that I would flesh it out with. But what I've noticed is that because I'm clear on that, I'm clear about my mission and my brand, opportunities to share that come up all the time. Even if it's just standing in the grocery checkout line and somebody says, what do you do? I trot out my little speech, memorize it, practice it, take the time to like make sure that you have your wording the way that you want it to be, and then memorize it and practice using it. This one, I feel like when I bring this up with my student employees, they roll their eyes and they're like, oh, you know, Mark Zuckerberg and the hoodies. But there is something, especially in a structured form like higher education, there really is something to looking the part. Dress for the role you want, not the role you have. That's the advice that I received early in my career, and it has not steered me wrong. And so, you know, we can roll eyes, we can poo-poo it, we can say that's just stupid. We can say now in this remote work environment, it doesn't matter because you're sitting behind a webcam all the time. But whatever the environment is that you're in, figure out how you can look the part, if you want to be the vice president of the university, how do the vice presidents dress? And not just one. Don't just blame it on like that one outlier that always shows up in a t-shirt and shorts, but really, you know, cast a wide net. And you will start to notice that people in senior level positions across higher ed almost always dress more formally. They show up, whether it's in a webcam or a face-to-face meeting, they show up pulled together, you know, they take care of personal hygiene and personal appearance. So if you are serious about branding yourself, take a minute to think, what is my physical appearance brand? And again, it sounds trivial, but I think it really is meaningful if people associate you as someone who always looks the part, whatever that part is. And then as part of your brand, you may want to consider participating in professional organizations, and that can be things like the NCLCA for Learning Center Management. But there's different ways and levels to participate. So be strategic in thinking about what is authentic to you and what will help move your career forward. It might be participating in online discussion forums and mentoring other people that are new to the profession. It might be trying to elevate the profession through scholarly research. You know, what works for you in terms of how to make that participation part of your brand. This is one of the most exciting things, and I apologize, I see the time, so I'm going to try and hurry, but Dory Clark, who you'll see at the last slide where I have some further suggestions, is one of my favorite, I don't even know what to call her, like productivity, self-improvement gurus. She suggests that everyone should have their own personal advisory board for your career. And if you want to make this really formal and invite everyone over to your house to have an advisory board meeting once a quarter, you could, but the general idea is less formal than that. And really it's just identifying who in your life can serve to advise you on different facets of your career. And there's so much value to this. it's so valuable to get this outside perspective. I talked about how you need to know yourself. You can get other people's perspectives on your strengths, your weaknesses, what you bring to the table, just by going to people who have a vested interest in your success. It also brings diversity of thought. Your spouse, your mom probably have a different perspective on you professionally than your work colleagues do. And one of the reasons I love this idea of an advisory board is because it acknowledges the role that your spouse, your parents, your siblings can play in shaping your career, because they do, but I think sometimes we don't give them credit for that. We don't acknowledge that role. And by formally kind of listing it out, it allows you to leverage the different strengths that different people bring when they're already invested in your success. And so you might be thinking, well, my spouse doesn't know anything about higher education, and they honestly don't really care very much. I mean, they love me and they want to support me, but I don't think I'd ever really go to my spouse for advice about a career strategy. That's okay, because you just said they love you, they support you. So maybe their role on your advisory board is to be your cheerleader. So maybe that's the person you go to when you just need somebody to be like, you got this, I think you're awesome. That's an important role, actually, on an advisory board. So in terms of forming your advisory board, I suggest starting by making a list and just ask yourself questions like, who would I go to if I wanted someone to proofread a resume? Who would I go to if I was feeling really insecure about what to wear for a high stakes interview? Who would I go to if I didn't understand LinkedIn's new changes and I couldn't make my profile do what I want it to do? As you start to answer those questions, boom, that's your advisory board right there. One of the other reasons I love having an advisory board is, even if it's just in my head, like, my people don't know they're my advisory board. They are. I've never told them that. As far as they know, they're just my friends and my mentors and my professional, colleagues, and that's okay. But one of the reasons I love about this is that when you invite other people to invest in you, they're going to be more likely to keep you in mind as they hear about opportunities. They're going to be more likely to recommend you for opportunities. It just raises, their awareness of you in their minds. So it helps you a lot. By thinking of it as an advisory board too, instead of just like one mentor, it allows you to avoid overburdening people, and it allows you to play to people's strengths. So you're not going to your one professional mentor for all career advice. You're spreading that out, and you're realizing that, there's a lot of people that could give you advice on how to deal with a difficult employee. And I think, given the time, I was going to pose this as a discussion question about what is it that makes a good mentor? How do you know, how can you identify a potential good mentor? We'll skip the discussion part of that in the interest of time. Just a couple things that I wanted to point out. A good mentor is someone you can go to throughout the cycle of a career, not just with advice about making one job change. It's not just somebody that you go to get a letter of reference, but it's someone that you could actually go to and say, I'm really struggling. How do you deal with burnout? Or what's your best advice to deal with an underperforming employee? A good mentor is someone that can really help you navigate a career. Also, a good mentor has your best interest at heart. So they're going to filter their advice through the lens of knowing you, knowing who you are and seeing who you really are. And lastly, a good mentor will be honest with you. And that's hard to find, because most of us are too nice to be candid. And so when you find a mentor that will give constructive feedback and still believe in you, but be honest, that is really valuable. So hang on to that. And then 2 slides left, I promise we're really close. Collect testimonials. This will probably feel uncomfortable because we're not used to thinking about it this way. But anytime that someone testifies to the good job you do, and this can come through an email, that says, thanks for doing XYZ. It might be things that your supervisor says on a performance evaluation. It might be something that a colleague says on LinkedIn. If you teach or you interface with students, it might be during student evaluation time, or formal letters of reference that people have written. That's just some ideas. Honestly, there's a lot of different ways. But when you get those things, save them. I did this for years and years and years for my programs. I would keep a file of positive impact stories so that when I needed to trot one out, to support a strategic plan or to, include in an annual report, I had plenty of things to choose from. It took me years to realize, why am I not doing this for myself? So depending on your level of comfort, you may want to throw one or two of them onto your resume. Just kind of end your resume with a little quote about how awesome you are from someone else. You may want to, find a way to include them if you have a website, a personal website or professional website, email signature line. If that's outside of your comfort zone, though, I would say still keep them and make a habit of regularly reading them. Number one, this is really good for those down days that everybody has. But number two, they'll start to kind of sink into your brain. And there have been multiple times when I've been in a job interview and someone has asked me to speak to, a particular experience or a qualification. And because that was in my mind, because I remembered these testimonials, I could say something like, well, a former dean of mine once said that one of Wendy's greatest strengths is da da da. And I love that. It's just always stuck with me. And it's a little extra powerful, right? When you have someone else testify to your strengths as opposed to just you claiming them. Here's what that looks like, because I figured I better be an example and model what I'm saying, because it can be uncomfortable to claim what other people, testify to about us. So I put a few of mine here just to show you. And imagine if you are hiring and you're looking for somebody that can be a really good coach for their staff, and you see something like this first thing tucked into the resume, that you realize this is somebody that really does believe in coaching their staff and cheering them on. That's the kind of thing that's going to make the hiring agents sit up and take notice. Okay, just to wrap things up, because we can only cover so much in this 1 hour, and we do have Q&A. I'm going to stay on for half an hour, so if you have questions, please, we're good. But for further reading, if you are interested, there are so many books out there in the career planning and the career development space. These are just a few, just a handful that I have found particularly helpful over the years, and I apologize, I don't have author names on them, but the title should be, enough to find them online. Coach Yourself to a New Career by Tulane Mediner. My copy of that is dog-eared, and the reason I love it is because it's very, very practical. And just filled with lots of small actionable tips that you can take. Both Reinventing You and Entrepreneurial You are by Dory Clark, who I mentioned earlier. She's kind of a queen of branding and claiming your space as a thought leader. What Got You Here Won't Get You There. I can't recommend that highly enough for kind of mid-level career people who want to scale up. If you've gotten to a point where you feel like I've done pretty well, but now I'm stuck, like how do I take it to the next level? This is the book. This is the book to read. And I do feel obligated to mention that the author co-wrote with someone else, What Got You Here Won't Get You There for Women. So if you identify as a woman, I would recommend that one as well, because women do face some unique challenges in the workforce. One of the more common that you're probably familiar with is not being too assertive and not being too nice, and you're kind of stuck in this like hard place where you can't be either as a leader, as a supervisor and boss. And that's one of many things that are addressed in the book that are really helpful. So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport, who I mentioned earlier, who talks about kind of finding an area where you can excel and becoming known for that. Disrupt Yourself is a really enjoyable read by Whitney Johnson, who takes principles of disruption and makes the argument that all of us should change, if not our full career, then at least change significant aspects of it on a regular basis, because it keeps us on our toes. It keeps us doing our best work. Really, really compelling I would say it's not a long read. It's a fairly short book. I would recommend that one. So these are just some thoughts if you're interested and you want to pursue. Thank you for bearing with me. I'm sorry we went over a few minutes. I hope that this has been helpful, you know, that you at least got a few helpful ideas as you move forward in your own careers. I can't stress enough how important it is that you're thinking about moving forward in your careers, especially now that I have moved somewhat away from higher education and working more in the governmental space where a lot of my job is dealing with policy. We need you so much. We need like good leaders that are charting the course for where we're going in the future. And the fact that you're here today shows me you're invested in that. And so I'm just here to cheer you on. I'm so excited for you and I hope all the best for you. Thanks for hanging in there with me.
And I do want to just remind everybody, if you are interested in a fall trial of academia, you can email me at rachelc@engineerica.com. That's RACHELC@ENGINEERICA.com. Thank you everyone for coming. And you're getting some thank yous in the chat there, Wendy. So awesome job. Thank you so much for your time today. And hope everybody has a great rest of your week.